And another thing that I was thinking of is I had visited my brother. This is probably, I was in my late 40s, so a good 15 plus years ago. And I'd gone to visit him, and I was in a conversation with one of his daughters, a delightful young woman to this day. She's an amazing, amazing woman. And you know, when you're the aunt, sometimes kids can confide in you things that they maybe aren't confiding so much with their parents. And I don't know what led her to confide in me, whether I said something that made her feel like I would understand or not, but she was actually exploring Wicca. And no one in my family, of course, knew anything about my practices. And the question she asked me led me to think that she was in touch with some folks it was best that she not be in touch with. She was a youngster. We're talking 14, 15, 16, you know, that age range. And so I told her how I felt about who she was in touch with, and I felt that they were not legitimate, that it wouldn't be healthy for her to have any kind of a relationship with them. And I remember her looking at me, and she said, well, how do you even know anything about this? The conversation I had in my mind, balancing my own need to feel I needed to keep private things private with how could I make this young girl, looking at her fuddy-duddy aunt, understand that I knew what I was talking about. So I just went for it. Looked right into her big brown eyes, and I said, well, because your aunt happens to be a Wiccan high priestess. And I remember the look that she gave me. And it was almost like a, she didn't know what to say next. And I said, honey, are you okay with that? And then she said, I can't believe I have an aunt that cool. Well, then of course we could have the conversation that there was nothing cool or with it or jazzy or attention-getting or cliquish or clannish about following a true call to a spiritual connection. And we talked about what her connection was, why what she had read was appealing to her when it came to earth-based practices, why this particular group who were declaring they were Wiccan, indeed they were not at all, what about it appealed to her. And she and I were able to have a conversation which then led to our being in touch regularly. Eventually she did actually meet an appropriate group. I remember that look that she gave me, kind of stunned after I made my announcement, and I kind of made the announcement for effect because I wanted to get her attention. I'm thinking, how can an older person convince this younger person, in this case, that we know better, we know what we're talking about? And she looked at me and she said, I can't believe I have an aunt that's so cool. I was the kid in high school. I didn't date until my last year of high school. I was a geek, and I was chubby, and I was popular within my own sphere of other geeky, chubby girls, and boys too, but I was on nobody's popularity list, if you know what I mean. I was the least likely to ever have anything interesting happen to me. I proved that wrong on several occasions in my life, in several ways, but her looking at me and thinking I was like one of the cool kids, like the cutest thing, but it did lead to some very serious conversations. And then visiting her family again a couple years later. My brother has a ranch. They raise horses. Not a lot of horses, but they raise horses, and the farrier was there, and she happened to be a woman. And my brother said, we call her the horse whisperer, because even our Arabians that don't like anybody touching their hooves will stand there placidly for her. Well, I wanted to see this whole operation. I've never seen a horse shod before. I wanted to watch the whole thing, and she was kind enough to let me be there with her. Well, we discovered in the process that we had a lot in common when it came to our spirituality, and we really got into the conversation. And I didn't say anything to my brother at the time except to tell him I thought his friend was wonderful, and I really enjoyed spending time with her. I got a phone call not too long after I got home, and my brother says to me, I can't believe you're a Wiccan. And when he said that, I wasn't sure if it was going to be like, I can't believe you're a Wiccan, or it was like his daughter saying, oh, I can't believe you're Wiccan. I didn't know what his attitude was. He's not somebody who has a lot of emotion in his voice. And I said, yeah. He says, well, how long? I said, well, you had left home before I got involved with the movement, so it wasn't like anything I was hiding from you when we were kids, because I was like 18 or 19 when I first started reaching out to Earth-centered groups. What ends up, he knew his farrier very, very well, very close. They were very fond of her. And he had a lot of respect for her. She had shared a lot about her beliefs and her practices with him. So the cool thing was he had already had developed a great respect for the Wiccan way through her. And because he had that respect for her, he didn't have any misconceptions about what might be for me. And it's been interesting over the years, the questions he will ask. That was also of a great benefit because she had never had a conversation with his daughter, that connection couldn't happen where she could mentor and support her. So things end up working out very, very well. Because I did say to my brother, you know, have she and Katie, that's his daughter, ever had a conversation? Because I think Katie needs a mentor just like her. And things worked out beautifully. But that was kind of a neat experience of not intentionally being out. And then the conversation I had with my brother was just so life-affirming, because he's probably the person I love the most and respect the most in the world. And then I had one other being in or out of the closet experience that I wanted to share. We all have stories to tell, don't we? I would love to hear some of your stories. Mine are mostly all positive because I've been so very selective about who knows what about me. So anyway, the last one I wanted to share is the minister at the church that I used to go to before we moved. She taught once a year a comparative, no, I think it was called the Feminine Divine in All Religions or something like that, class at the university. And like 4 years in a row, she had me come and talk to represent goddess spirituality. It wasn't even specifically with the word Wicca, but goddess spirituality. And the first year it was interesting. There weren't a lot of questions from folks, but they listened. The second year there was a few more questions. The third year there was a lot of communication and engagement and a wonderful conversation afterwards with folks who obviously were men and women both who were exploring what the feminine divine might be. And the last year I did it, and there was a last year because my minister stopped giving the course, teaching it. But the last year that I did it, it was very interesting. Now when I talk in public and speak to specifically Wicca as I live it, I intentionally dress subdued, probably in something no different than what I'm wearing now. Because one of the things that I'm able to bring to the world is the fact that all of us, all walks of life, all ages, all experiences can be part of this miraculous journey together. I've never felt called to look witchy. Never felt called to wear certain jewelry or certain clothing or present myself in a certain style. It's like this is what you would see if I were representing myself as a pagan or an earth-based practitioner or someone honoring the goddess or a Wiccan, or even when it comes to being priestess in the community. This is what you see. That last time, my minister actually was concerned that it was going badly because I kept getting what seemed almost like overly aggressive, pointed questions from men and women both in this symposium, this presentation. I think it was a 4-hour discussion. This night was given over just to what I brought. I think what was happening was there were men and women in the group who were either already involved, because at the point at which there was a lot more of exploration and pagan groups on campus and that kind of thing. They already had a certain degree of involvement, and they basically want to know what my validity was, why I would speak on behalf of, why did what I say matter? You can understand that. You come in for a 4-hour class and there's some talking head in front of it and you wonder, why them? Especially when it's an area you're exploring yourself. And the questions were really rather pointed. I won't say it was uncomfortable, because I had certainly been involved in interfaith discussions that hadn't been too different from that over the years. And one of my favorite things has always been interfaith panels and discussions. I'm not talking interfaith just within the pagan community, I'm talking within the wider community. But I did wonder, I remember when a minister actually at one point said to her class, of course she wasn't a minister at this class, she was just a university professor, back off folks, you're getting, almost accusatory, you need to be respectful of the person who's given their time to talk. And I said, no, I'm fine with this. Some of the questions made me stop and think. Some of the questions made me even challenge what I had begun to say by rote. I made presentations to these kinds of groups. I said, I'm actually enjoying the discussion. And therefore, there was half a dozen of the young people that were really very pointed in the kind of questions they were asking. What I think it was is they had picked up on the fact that I'd come up in a time very different from theirs. And they were asking very specific questions about the Great Rite and the role of women in early covens, and the health or not health of the very cloistered, very intimate environment in covens, and they were really questioning the not the validity of any experience I had, because I wasn't being that specific about it, but they had a sense I'd come up in a time that they felt like they wanted to question somebody who'd been there, and they questioned rather forcefully. I didn't think it was a bad thing at all. I thought it showed, in a way, discernment of wanting to get to the root of something, wanting to understand something. And afterwards, one of them came up to me and they said, we feel like there's a lot left unsaid. That in a wider group, I think there was probably about 60 or 75 or so people. It was one of those amphitheater type classes. And so these 6 come up afterwards. Well, there was people that come up afterwards, but these 6 then stayed and wanted to ask, talk to me. And they said, we feel there's a lot unsaid, both on your part and our part, and we'd like you to come and spend some time with us if you're comfortable. And it was fun for me because I had been into a dormitory university setting since 1971. And so I went back to one of their apartments, several of them lived there actually. And we had what an amazing, amazing conversation. And it was good for me on a lot of levels because it put me in touch with the youth and what was happening in the movement and the community that was not necessarily like what I had experienced. And it was particularly good for them too because, I just looked like their grandmother. You're somebody that they would see, in the grocery store or, a librarian or, there was nothing about me because these were all, at this point, goth was the reigning culture in most of the Wiccan community. So, the whole look and their demeanor, their body art, and there I was, this kind of FUD in the middle of all of that, not appearing to be exotic in any way. And it was the most amazing, transformative night for me. And we had a chance then in that environment, because we started experiencing what we had in common, for me to share more of what it had been like in the 70s and the 80s. I mean, these folks hadn't even been around probably in the 90s for this. And it was an amazingly transformative night for me. I remember thinking, and that's why it's part of my reflections on In or Out of the Closet, my tendency had always been to keep to myself the fact I did come up in a BTW coven in the middle 70s. It didn't matter. It didn't have anything to do specifically about now. It fed who I am now, but wasn't part of the world that I was currently in touch with. I intentionally left that community in the early 80s. No, middle 80s. I'm rushing it too much. The opportunity to decide what of it I was willing to share, what of it I could share in light of the oaths I'd taken, and that It was part of my wider pagan experience and part of who I was, and there's no reason why certain aspects of it could not be shared. You all know this. You watch my videos. You know what I've chosen to share of it. In the end, nothing specific to those days exactly, but the way they've influenced me now. If I had not spent, and ended up being well into the early hours of the morning, if I had not spent that time with those folks, I wouldn't be here. I would never have posted a thing online. I would never have joined any group online. Would not have been on YouTube. If I were on Facebook still, you'd never know that I even practiced earth-based practices. I'd come up in a time that you simply didn't discuss it outside of your circle. I don't know how many times I can go back to sitting in that room with those youngsters and feeling for the first time a deep soul connection to everyone, yearning for connection to the old ways, no matter what practices we decide to align to that. I'm feeling that we were all touching on the same energy, if not the same deity, maybe the same deities too. Truly, I would not be here if it weren't for that night. I wouldn't know any of you, literally any of you, even the few of you from this experience on YouTube who have become deep, personal soul friends of mine. Why I wanted to share that is I still remember being there that night and having this beautiful, his body was a work of art, his hair, his clothing, a stunning dark Adonis of a young man, tell me that I had been good for him, because he had assumed he had nothing in common with those who'd come before, the people like me, as he put it, and that what we wore, or the music we listened to, had nothing to do with the soul connection we had. Lover of the goddess to lover of the goddess. A life-changing moment for me. Truly an opening up and a widening up of my experience and my willingness to be present to the possibilities of contemporary paganism. So, it looks like these weekly YouTube pagan challenges are going to lead me to remembering things and reflecting on things, and these are the things that came to my mind after I posted that, and I've been thinking about them and journaling about them this week. The things that brought me here, meaning to some of you who live publicly and openly who you are, spiritually and religiously and in your practices, out there in the open for the world to see every day. I can look at the videos I've watched this past week and see that you've been true to yourself and you've lived that way. And I can say to myself, maybe I haven't been true to myself. And then I can look where I was and where I am now and realize what a huge transformation in relationships and community building and widening of my experiences through the experiences of others has been a part of my life, the length of my life. Maybe I'm not out there wearing my necklace that proclaims that I am Wiccan. Maybe people I don't know well don't know what my religion or my beliefs are. But I can only appreciate how far different my experience of living in a wider sense in our community is now than it was for the first couple, if not several decades, of my being part of a community. It's been a good week to think about the past. I didn't have any bad reflections when I look back on moments of being in or out of the closet. Well, that doesn't mean I don't have some challenging, dramatic, traumatic, poignant, sad, happy, you name it, experiences along the way when it comes to my practices and my beliefs and the communities I've been involved with. But when it comes to the times I chose to be more out and honoring the times I chose to be private, I don't have a bad recollection. I wonder if somewhere along the way in the 52 questions, 50 of them remaining, I might have cause then to revisit some of the things that became the most challenging of my experience of being part of this community. A week of reflections on being in or out of the broom closet. I wish you all mirth and reverence. Mary Part.